Welcome, everyone. My name is Piper Hendricks. I'm the CEO of Stories Change Power, and I'm so glad that you're here today. If you are new to this series, welcome. We like to begin with a song, and that was Kebmo's 2016 version of America the Beautiful, welcoming you today. Throughout 2026, we are recognizing the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And today's webinar, which is just days before July 4th, feels incredibly special. Our mission at Stories Change Power is to support you in making a difference in your neighborhood, your community, and your country. And we do that by teaching advocacy strategy as well as storytelling for impact. Every month this year, we're sharing ways to boost your civic engagement and build your civic muscle, meaning you're rolling up your sleeves and being part of finding solutions to problems at the local, state, and national level. Today, we're taking a step back and thinking about the narratives of this country. And as an organization with stories in our name, we know that story and narrative are often used interchangeably. But there's actually a really important difference. And if you think about narrative as something much bigger than story, the way I like to think about it is if story is the brick, then narrative is the building. Or if stories are the trees, narrative is the forest. Only narrative isn't usually as visible as buildings or forests. It's something that's deeper, an often invisible pattern that helps us understand why something matters, what's at stake, and what we should do as a result. Which is why I'm absolutely delighted to welcome today's speakers who have been thinking about narratives about this country for 3 years and counting. Before I introduce them, 5 quick things you need to know. Number 1, we have captions enabled, so please use them if they're helpful to you. Number 2, we'll have the chat open throughout this webinar for constructive conversation. The chat is only for our human friends. If you are AI, we are in the process of kicking you out. We'll check to be sure that you're actually AI by sending you a direct message. If we don't hear from you, we'll err on the side of caution, and your AI is welcome to watch the recording. We welcome questions anytime throughout the webinar, and there's a little Q button at the bottom of your screen. Enter your question there rather than in the chat. It's much easier for us to make sure we don't lose anything in what may be a very robust conversation there. If we're not able to reach your question, we will aim to do that in a LinkedIn post. We call those our bonus points, and we'll get back to you there in the weeks ahead. Fourth, you are off camera and off mic, so be comfortable, especially if you're in the heat wave right now. Make sure that you're staying cool and comfortable and do what you need to do to be fully present for what's going to be a really exciting conversation. And then fifth, if you're curious about how to tell stories that prioritize the dignity of everyone involved, you need to join us for the next 4 Tuesdays for our ethical storytelling course. We'll share a very generous discount code at the end of today's webinar, so stay tuned for that. And with that, it is an absolute pleasure to introduce today's 3 speakers, all of whom are part of the Baha'i Office of Public Affairs. I'll keep these short, and I encourage you to check out their website to learn more about each speaker. Welcome to Matt, who is the Race Discourse Officer there and co-coordinates the office's collaboration with individuals, organizations, and agencies in the U.S. engaged in public discourse and policy advocacy directed toward racial justice and racial unity. Welcome to PJ, who is the Office of Public Affairs Director, where he provides strategic stewardship of national engagement with public discourse and the office's broader communications work. And welcome to Selvi, who is a discourse officer as well. Prior to joining the office in 2021, she worked with qualitative institutional research and taught courses on inequality and social justice. Welcome, Selvi, PJ, and Matt. It's a joy to have you here with us today.
Thank you for having us. Really excited to be here.
And Selvi, I will hand it over to you. We'll have some slides coming up for everyone, and we will get the conversation underway.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Piper. I'd like to just start by saying how happy we really are to be joining both this webinar and not least the July episode, but also just to become a part of the community of discourse that you've been building. And we really appreciate the thoughtful way that you do that work. So it's really such a pleasure and an honor to be joining you today. Thank you for having us. I'm going to share a bit about the project, and then my colleagues will help to give a little bit of a taste of some of the content of the conversations that we've been having. But maybe we'll just start by saying that the Baha'i community has works for the transformation of society, works for the betterment of society, with a vision of trying to build um, a world characterized by justice and unity and shared prosperity. And there are a range of different ways that we do that. The most prevalent is community building at the grassroots, which across this country and actually around the world in local communities, Baha'is are doing activities to try to build capacity for change and for bringing people together to work together. But another dimension of that work is at the level of thought, and that's what our office focuses on. And that's also at different levels from the local to the international, but we focus on the national level. So we're looking at the evolution of thought about issues of concern at the national level. And the office has worked in, for example, overcoming racism, the discourse on overcoming racism, economic justice, and other areas. But a few years ago, we started to want to delve into deeper questions that underlie other issues and that kind of impact our ability as a society to address issues like racism and economic justice and other issues. We felt that there were deeper questions that might help us move forward in areas where we might be stuck in moving forward. And at the same time, we were noticing the emergence of conversations about narratives of America. Of course, this is something that we've thought about as long as we've had a country, but we started to notice important work being done and receiving more public attention about narratives, and I'll use the plural, and so perhaps I should say stories, but I think both stories and narratives about our country, the life of our country, and felt that this was an important area where we could engage. The questions feel profound. They they feel dynamic, and there feels like there's a potential there. And so we started to bring people together for conversations about questions about narratives of America. And the overarching question was, what are the narratives, or how can we create honest, inclusive, and empowering narratives of our country? And I don't probably need to make the case for the importance of narrative in this context, but we did feel the need to do that as part of these conversations. And so we would talk about how narratives impact our sense of possibility, our sense of who we are and what we can do, the way we relate to the world, the way we understand the world. They shape behavior, they shape institutions and social practices and culture. And narratives are something that we create individually, collectively. And so there's a possibility there to then think about how to frame the narratives that we need, to ask what the narratives are that we need, and then how do we frame them. So we brought people into conversation. A lot of them were Zoom conversations, but we were also able to do different in-person spaces. And we created a website here. My colleague Matt is showing us the website that's about the project itself, and then about some other projects that grew out of the original series of conversations. And on this website, you can find a document that we're going to share a little bit from with you, and that we've created with the idea that it's open source. It's for anyone who would like to use it, to use how they would like. So we also would like to offer that to your community of discourse in case it's helpful for folks. So uh, we learned a lot through the course of having these conversations. And one of the things we learned was that it's important to be able to get to the depth that these conversations can go to, it's important to create a level of trust in the space. And often it was a Zoom session with people who hadn't met each other before. And so we found that it was important for us to share some of our intention, which was an important part of that was that we weren't trying to provide a narrative or impose a narrative that we had concocted, but really felt that narrative building was something that people needed to join into together and that we were trying to create spaces for thinking about it. So that was one important part of it. And was also important for us to make the point that there's a complexity to probably all countries, the narratives that underlie them, and that we were trying to hold a recognition of the suffering and the wrongs that are part of our history, and also the achievements and the aspirations that are part of our history. And to try to hold both those things at the same time was an important thing also for creating trust for participation from a diversity of perspectives. We also found that we needed to try to create trust among the participants who were there, and that many of them came in, and we knew this, with very sincere commitment to this country and to its betterment. But we wanted them to be able to see that from each other. And so we asked a question, and I'm gonna, I think, go ahead right now and um, pose that question to everyone that's in the space, to all of the viewers of the webinar, and ask you to answer it in the chat, and then to just watch the beautiful things that you will see from the others who are in this space with us together, because that it feels like a very important part of having this conversation. And so the question, it evolved, but I'm going to say it this way, which is, tell me something about the United States of America that inspires you to work for the well-being of society and the betterment of our country. So that's an invitation to you to answer in the chat. And maybe while that happens, I'll just say that out of these conversations that we were having, we went on to adapt the conversation for different spaces. You can see on the slide, there's a volume of written pieces about religious perspectives on the narratives of America. And then we also convened a symposium where we tried to have the next conversation that you'd want to have after having the first conversation, because it is a conversation that kind of wants to keep going once it gets started. So I actually can't see the chat myself, but hopefully there's the responses coming in that other people can see.
Oh, we are starting to get some, Selvi, and I think so. I'll reiterate that we are inviting you, if you can do so safely. If you're driving, as I always say, focus on the road, that comes first. But if you're in a place to share, we would love to hear something about America that inspires you to work for its betterment. And while folks are thinking and sharing, I will share that Selvi is in one of my favorite places in the world, and that is a public library. So, but there are a couple folks I think who might have a little trouble hearing you. So if you don't mind speaking just a little bit more loudly, I understand in a library that can be counterintuitive, but we'd welcome that. And I'm seeing some beautiful responses come in. Please keep thinking and keep sharing. I am seeing, let's see here. Oh my goodness, let's see if I can keep up as they're coming in. The diversity of our people and freedom to express our thoughts and opinion. Jane, yes, that I'm hearing the First Amendment in that, and what a beautiful and unique thing that is in this country. We forget that sometimes. Oh, this is beautiful, Felicia, that our Constitution was written where it can be applied to any era. It is fluid and not rigid. There are some examples of things that were said and written hundreds of years ago and yet feel so relevant to today. Daniel is saying the initial vision of our founders of our country. Angelina, my family, relatives, and neighbors are here, and that inspires me. Yes. Laura, loving this, the beautiful moments of connections in urban spaces that more rural communities don't have access to. So hearing, differences there in urban and rural. I know there's also beautiful connections in rural communities. Let's see. Oh, seeing many here. Selvi, I could keep going all day. Let me pick one more, and then I'll hand it back to you. Oh, okay. Whitney, I love this. The friendliness across differences of ethnic and immigration backgrounds that characterizes my own local neighborhood and town. So thank you, everyone. We welcome, keep sharing what is inspiring you. But hopefully that's giving it a flavor of some of the things that you're finding also in your work, Selvi.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And I hope I'll move a little bit closer. Maybe you can hear me well. So then I wanted to share, to just actually dive into some of the content. And hopefully this is useful to the work of many of those who are here today. So we did find that also at the outset, it was important to recognize the very great diversity of narratives, stories. I don't actually know on the way you define it, which one, because I think in a way both do apply, but of the many specific particular narratives or stories that make up the life of the country. So, and part of our process was reading together passage, sections and then discussing them. So I would like to just do that with the group and read this paragraph from our concept note. There are a multitude of narratives that make up the life and history of this country, like a braid woven from different strands. They include the stories of the many peoples that compose this country, from the continent's indigenous inhabitants to early European settlers and colonizers, to Africans brought here and enslaved, to myriad immigrants from every corner of the globe. Our stories include remarkable accomplishments alongside violence and oppression. Our stories include interdependencies and hybridizations. Geography and ecology have shaped our stories. Nations and ways of life adapted over millennia to the landscape suffered displacement, while native food crops became staples far away. Urban and rural communities and economies grew and declined. Stories of our economic life encompass the extraction of natural resources and human labor, invention, industrialization, capitalism, world trade, the American dream, inequality, and more. Our stories include the building of a federated republic that would become a world power based on ideals we have never fully lived up to, but never given up on. Our stories include the arts and sciences, religious communities, civil society, social movements, and more. So that, I think, gave a sense of recognizing and acknowledging the many, many stories that have been told, that are being told, that need to be told. And then we would ask questions about how these stories fit together, or how they could fit together, and what we need to think about when asking about that question. So I'll hand it over to my colleague Matt to continue.
Yes, thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be with you all. Yes, as Selby mentioned, one of the things that we really wanted to share was how much from this experience of having conversations with various iterations of groups, all kinds of diversity, from virtual to in-person settings, like really what came out of it that really stood out to us as insightful for the work of many folks that are engaged in trying to tell narratives of or stories of their own community, or organize narratives and stories of the country as a whole. And so another insight that emerged, as you can imagine, from conversations about narratives and stories in the US was a need to hold stories that felt like they just opposed one another. Sometimes we can feel in our society that things are zero sum and that only one thing can be true at a time. And if it's in opposition of something else, then that negates it. And you can find yourself in just a contest of which story is the most true or not. And so we found many insights from these explorations, these conversations that helped us to understand how these multitudes of narratives could be held together. And as you can imagine, one of the tools we found really helpful was metaphors. So, for example, through multiple iterations of conversations, a number of metaphors arose and emerged, and we included it in the documents that you can find on our website. But here was one in particular that I thought was especially helpful. So it says the promissory note that Reverend Dr. King refers to can be understood in a way that dignifies the founding ideals of this country as an unfinished project, instead of emphasizing their hypocrisy, by finding in those ideals an inherent aspiration that may have been even beyond the vision of those who first formulated them. So this metaphor of a promissory note, we found helped us to think about, I mean, one, just to be inspired by the many folks who've been telling wonderful meta narratives of our country for decades now, like Reverend Dr. King and many others. But then to just lean into this metaphor for conversations today, where it helps you to understand that there's no need to malign the vision of the founders, despite the hypocrisy of words and deeds, but instead to appreciate what they offered and how that can be something that is not given up on or thrown out, but something that is redeemed or continued to work for. So there was a number of a number of metaphors that we found really helpful. Another idea that stood out to us throughout these conversations was the need to recognize, what might be missing, or where might there be opportunity to invite the exploration of new ground in terms of the narratives of America. And so one idea that really emerged in a lot of these conversations that we wanted to surface here is captured in this paragraph, where it says, we must also ask, however, whether America's founding moral and philosophical ideals, as laudable as many of them are, adequately meet the needs of a diverse nation like ours, or provide full scope for realizing our potential. What if America has latent potentialities for justice and shared prosperity that do not derive solely from the ideals of Western liberalism articulated by the founding fathers? After all, the original inhabitants of this land and those who were enslaved to work it even before the country was formed did not come from the tradition of Western liberalism, and the ideals of their descendants have never been adequately incorporated into the American story. The same is true of many immigrants to these lands. So, as you can imagine, as we were having these conversations about how to hold this multitude of narratives together, there were points in the conversations where, a couple of participants would tell us, like, this is missing something. This is too hard on our founding fathers. Like, this is like, maligning their ideals, their aspirations, too much. And so we would try to, figure out, okay, how do we articulate this in a way that doesn't do that? Because that's not our intention, and that's no one's intention for the most part. Um, but then in other conversations, we would also notice that, like, this doesn't acknowledge the fact that this country did not belong to the immigrants that came over, the colonizers, the colonists. That, like, this wasn't a land of just them. There was many other people that existed here, and how do we figure out how their stories are also dignified and appreciated in the same ways that we try to for our founding fathers? And so we, through conversation, found kind of this language really emerged through subtle refinements, through iterative conversations with a lot of folks. And it was nice to see that this paragraph, along with some of the other ones that, I and Selvi read, were able to sit together in a document and be appreciated as part of a holistic vision for how we might start to grapple with a meta narrative of our country. And in addition to this paragraph, but on the theme of recognizing what might be missing and inviting the exploration of new ground for the telling of this narrative, there was also this idea that emerged in our conversation, which was, even beyond the ideals of diverse social groups within this country, What if our potential as a nation derives, at least in part, from other factors entirely, including our historical experiences of injustice and collective trauma, our rich diversity, and our ongoing collective discovery of deeper moral or spiritual truths that must shape how we navigate our path forward despite our challenges as a nation accepting these truths? So this was another idea that we found a lot of resonance and receptivity to, and it emerged because it's helping us to recognize that in addition to narratives about our cultural or ethnic or ancestral identities, but also the stories that come from this experience over the last 250 years and beyond, because of course, this land wasn't first inhabited 250 years ago. It was inhabited long before that. And so the stories of the many peoples that were here also, and how they lived here, how land has changed, how society has changed, the highs and the lows of the efforts to build a nation that can hold all of this contradiction and diversity together is also probably a part of a story that we can tell that allows for us to envision a hopeful future, to see progress made, and to figure out what can we build on and what can we leave behind. And so lastly, another idea that really stood out to us in our conversations around this topic of narratives of America was this idea of learning. And this was something that felt like it was inviting the forward-looking aspect of how do you tell this narrative of America that can hold both the good and the bad, and the ugly and the progress and the setbacks. And so this idea was captured in this paragraph where it says, "We can think of history as a confluence of many elements, both beautiful and painful. Learning can offer a redeeming alchemy if it allows us to make of these elements a hopeful future. What is the story in this regard that learning could open up to us? What powers of the human spirit bring this alchemy within reach? What have we learned so far, and what do we still need to learn? What capacities do we need to develop in order to learn together in all of our diversity? What conditions need to be created for shared learning?" So this idea of learning, I think became prominent because we could appreciate in our conversations that we're talking about building something that has never been done before. So then what other way can that be? What other way can we go about that than to learn our way forward? If we think we have to replicate a model that has already existed, we probably will recreate some of the same oppression or setbacks or challenges that has already come to characterize our history. So if we're trying to figure out how to do something new, that has to be learned. And so then that invited us to think about, well, what are the conditions that need to be created for learning at all levels? Learning as an individual in your daily life. Like, what does that mean for you? What does it mean for learning as a part of a community? You may already live in communities that are full of diversity, and you have to learn how does this community build on that diversity and use it to contribute to the progress of all. But then also learning as a society. What does it mean? I mean, we see some glimpses of this maybe at the level of scientific and technological advancements, but we also need to bring that to bear when it comes to the advancement of certain principles, such as the founding ideals of equality and justice and freedom and prosperity for all. And so, yeah, so these were some of the key ideas that really emerged in a lot of these conversations that then set us up for what we wanted to explore as the next iteration of this conversation. And for that, I'll pass it on to PJ.
Yeah, thanks everyone for having us and for making time for this conversation. And I think just for those who are wondering, I think the link has been shared with you, but the document that's been quoted and referenced several times is on the website narrativesofamerica.us. And so you can download it and read it whenever you want to, whenever you have a chance. And we will share an opportunity at the end of where you can come study this with us, and would love to go deeper, because I think that the power of this project is the conversations that it elicits. And that's always been sort of the orientation around this project, is in a lot of the work of our office. So, just to reiterate something that Selvi mentioned at the beginning, that we think of we often say the wheel of change has many spokes, and it's important to sort of address all of those, to be working and thinking about all of the spokes. And so the work of our office really is at that level of language and thought. And we often talk about how there's this intimate connection between language, consciousness, thought, and action, and that the actions that we take are driven by the frameworks that we have in our mind, the values that we understand. And so a lot of the work that we do as an office is really at that level of trying to advance consciousness to affect then the other spokes of the wheel of change. The sort of, so we see it as one of the pieces of the actions related to transformative social change. But we recognize that there are many others. And so just to sort of re-emphasize where this project and this work sits in the context of change. And so, we developed this material, and we've been convening these spaces for several years. But we had a few thoughts about, where it could go, in addition to just the power of the spaces that were created. We were always looking for opportunities for more tangible outcomes of the project. And so a few of them that have come up over the years, I think you saw a couple on an earlier slide. One was a project with the Aspen Institute. They have a religion and society program. And we did a collection of essays with representatives from different faith backgrounds about the role of religion in the narratives of America. And so offering different perspectives on that. And then we worked with somebody through that project with Aspen. Somebody wanted to take this to a national convention that their faith community holds annually. And there was a day-long stream of that convention on the narratives of America. And it was really great to see how to adapt the material that we had developed for that audience. And we're getting very positive responses. And then you can see here the Advancing Together Symposium. That was a really great opportunity for us to create a space for about 50 individuals that we had built relationships with over the years to go a little deeper and think about how the ideas in this document and this project could find various forms of expression. And the materials we developed for the Advancing Together Symposium, which I think you can also get on our website. We've heard a lot. There was a question in the chat of, I think it was, what is our collective vision for the nation? And I think, this has been one of the themes and goals of this project, is this idea that has been mentioned a few times by Selvi and Matt, but of a meta-narrative. You see the question on the screen there: how can we create an honest, inclusive, and forward-looking story of America? So something that ties everything together. And so this question of meta-narrative has always been there. And as we've evolved the project, we've been trying to sort of give more expression to what that narrative, that meta-narrative might be. So at the Advancing Together Symposium, for example, we identified a few characteristics of the narrative that might, of this meta-narrative. And we had I'll briefly share, some of those characteristics were that it should be honest, it should be unifying, it should be empowering, it should be globally aware. And then we asked sort of the group that was gathered at our symposium to sort of explore how those elements of a meta-narrative might find expression. And then, we closed that gathering, which was just about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, with the question of application. So, what is the actions that people can take in sort of a thought and language project such as this that, has implications for action, but is really trying to push the consciousness of the nation forward. And so we thought about, encouraging the participants to weave the insights that they had gleaned from this conversation into opinion pieces and guest essays and national press outlets. Really being thoughtful about how to express these ideas on social media. A lot of the people that come have, broad audiences on social media. So encouraging them to, post about these ideas more so. And there was, a few other, ideas like, they're all part of different organizations, thinking about the narratives that their organization promotes. How would this inform how their organization approaches their own storytelling about who they are and what they do? But then, another piece of the sort of outcome or progress of this project that we had in mind, and this had been there from the very beginning, was that the semi-quincentennial was coming up. And it's sometimes fun to just try and even say that word, semi-quincentennial. I won't try it again. I probably even said it wrong, but the 250th anniversary of the country was on our mind, as a moment when the narrative of America would be on center stage and getting the spotlight. And so we thought like that this project might be a means by which we could contribute to that conversation, to that moment. And so all of what you see on the screen now is expressions of movement in that direction. But then over the past year, our office has been facilitating a process to offer a more direct contribution to the discourse on the 250th anniversary of the country, on the Declaration of Independence. And so what you see now on screen is the fruit of that effort. So it's called the Common Endeavor, Realizing the Promise of America. And this document is really a letter, and we've called it an invitation to conversation, to really think about use this historical moment as an inflection point, a point of reflection and imagining, the next 250 years. And in this document, we've been able to bring together and coalesce a lot of the ideas that we have, gathered over 3 years of being in deep conversation with so many thoughtful people. And then, also from the perspective of the Baha'i community, it's a letter from the American Baha'i community. What does the Baha'i community want to say at this moment to America that we feel like might be useful? And the idea that we landed on, really the central theme here, is the idea of spiritual renewal. And maybe just to say a little bit of what we mean by spiritual renewal, and drawing on some comments that I made at the beginning of one of the gatherings, which I'll briefly talk about around we had a few gatherings to sort of really extend the conversation of this letter out into the public square. But we had thought about how morality has stopped being something that we explicitly cultivate in society, that values have sort of become more of a personal thing, and that we seem to be assuming that morality and values are something that we cannot agree on together. And sort of this idea that what has happened is that the moral fabric that we need to function as a society has eroded. We struggle to talk about it, to even know what questions to ask. Questions like, what are our obligations to each other? What does integrity look like? What is the connection between personal morality and the way that we fulfill our role in society, whatever that happens to be? And so we felt like there's been a little bit of a vacuum around the possibility of sort of a moral and spiritual foundation, and that there's a hunger for a conversation around what that could look like in America at this moment. And we've offered a common endeavor as an opportunity to really start to have those conversations. And I wanted to read this quote from the document that's on the screen, and talk a little bit about it. So the quote here says, "The history of our country is one of great enterprise, including innovations in technology, industry, and commerce. These material achievements have changed our lives, but have not yielded shared prosperity. Unless aligned with spiritual and moral principles, material attainments can be as great a source of harm as of good. Our challenge now is to focus innovation, creativity, and effort on the spiritual dimensions of change." And there's something about this idea that has resonated with our office. It actually emerged in these conversations, this idea of spiritual technology, spiritual and moral enterprise. And I think one of the things that's really such a joy for our work is that we meet so many organizations and people, just like Piper and Stories Change Power, that are at the forefront of this conversation around spiritual and moral enterprise and technology. I think the Baha'i community at the local level is really, like, you could describe this work. This is the work of the Baha'i community at the local level, but I think there's so many organizations that are thinking about the way that we organize our lives at the local level and in communities, and how that influences not only our interpersonal relationships, our relationship with ourselves, our families, those around us, but our communities as protagonists of this type of change, and our institutions being thoughtful about this. So this is sort of one of the calls of a common endeavor, this idea of spiritual and moral renewal, and this idea of innovation, creativity on the spiritual dimensions of change. And I think it speaks to America at this moment because of the first part of this paragraph that you see on the screen, that I think one of the things that has made America so wonderful is this idea of enterprise and innovation. It's sort of one of the ways that you might describe the quality of America, and one of the strengths of this country and its history. But then how do we take that strength and add this sort of spiritual and moral dimension to that spirit of enterprise and innovation? So that's sort of, I think, one of the calls that the letter has been inviting us to. And one of our goals, I should say, is, if we had a series of gatherings over the last month, and you can follow it on our social media accounts. The Office of Public Affairs has, accounts on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. And then, of course, on our YouTube page. And we've been posting the videos. Some of them are up, some of them are coming, of the 4 gatherings that we hosted over the last month. Again, bringing together some thinkers around various discourses that are connected to themes in the letter, and ask them to sort of engage the letter, and from their vantage point and their social locations and their expertise, and to bring that conversation out to the public square. And so I encourage you to take a look at the letter itself, to watch the videos and the clips of the videos that we started to post and will continue to post online. And then our goal is to have, to continue the conversation. So we're based in DC, and we plan to have a series of conversations over the coming months. And then, the next iteration of the Advancing Together Symposium, which shared about a little bit earlier, will most likely be a way to dig into the ideas of a common endeavor in more depth. So the public conversations that we've been having are that they're really more public conversations. They're not as dynamically interactive, but the symposium is a place where we really try to encourage dynamic interaction. And then, we wrote the letter in a way that it is something that you can take into your own communities. So we hope and encourage you to just, read the letter on your own and think about the means by which you might be able to convene a space around a common endeavor. My wife and I just convened a conversation in our living room on Sunday, and it went really well. It was great. There was only about 6 people there, including the 2 of us and our children. But who are 4 and 2, they managed to sit through the conversation, the very adult conversation. But just to say that our office is creating spaces, but it's really meant as a tool for conversation that you are all having in your communities. That, along with the Narratives of America project material itself, that is another. We've built it as a tool that you can create space in your own community. So with that, I will stop because I know I've gone over time into the Q&A. So thank you for your time, and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, all 3 of you. I can hear the virtual applause from everyone who's joined us, and I really appreciate giving everybody a sample of your why, the what, and the how. All 3 years of work, all compressed, very compressed. And so we've got great questions coming in. As more folks have questions, please put those in the Q&A. I'd like to kick us off with taking a step back again, recognizing your project focused on narratives. And I feel like I skimmed over a bit the story versus narrative distinction earlier. I think one of my favorite examples is to say, if you hear a story about a family that doesn't have a place to live, they're living in their car. If your larger narrative is if everyone just works hard enough, they can make things work, then you're going to hear that story as an example of people who aren't working hard enough. If your narrative is there are some systems, there are things in this country that aren't serving everyone, then you'll hear that story as evidence. It fits into that larger building. The story is the brick, the narrative as the building, you hear it very differently, which is really important because when we share stories, we may not recognize that what we think we're saying isn't what's being heard. And so that's the way I'm thinking of narratives. And I really appreciate, Matt, that the metaphors. I mean, it's like we're fish swimming in water, and we just don't even see the narrative sometimes. So making those clear, and really want to underscore that yes, sometimes those narratives are contradictory. So I'd love to hear, why was it that you focused on narratives, and why are they so key to our shared future? And I'll put that open to anybody who's I want to say brave enough to take it on, but who would like to take that on.
Please, I was going to invite you anyway, Selvi.
Well, I think for very much for the reasons that you've mentioned, that they really help us interpret um, who we are, what we're here for, what the world is, and I think very much what's possible and not possible. And so I think in a way, the letter that PJ shared, the title of it, Our Common Endeavor, that's a narrative framing. Do we think of this whole reality that's called the United States of America as a shared project that has beautiful aims and aspirations, and that we're all a part of, and to think today about all being a part of it, and to cast that narrative lens back in time over a very difficult history, and to try today, sorry, I always do this, it always makes me cry, to try today to understand how we can redeem what was suffered and lost by how we look to the future. So somehow just that intention of taking a narrative framing of common endeavor opens up so many things to think about, and also maybe new ways to think about them, and things that can touch your heart or inspire your action. Or there's just so much to be gained by being intentional about the framing that you're giving to things, and the interpretations that you're trying to build. And it is a socially it is a constructed thing, but I don't think it's any less true for that. I think it can help you move into greater and greater truth by being intentional about it.
I also love how, how the kind of narrative you tell and how you tell that narrative helps you to see dimensions of reality that may have been hard to see. Like for us, it became so wonderful throughout all of these conversations, over the last few years, and now with these conversations that are being had around this new document called A Common Endeavor, is being able to recognize that like a part of our narrative has to be that the has to help us see the spiritual dimension of things, has to help us see that, there is an underlying desire for all people to have dignity and to live noble lives, and to be seen as protagonists of not just their own betterment, but the betterment of the country, the betterment of the world even. Everyone wants to be part of carrying forward, the advancement of civilization. And so when you look at our stories, recognizing that we weren't just, animals, we weren't just machines, moving, making either perfect or imperfect, choices. We're always imperfect, but we're striving to learn from our mistakes and to build something better than what existed. And that, of course, was what, motivated the founders of this country to organize the country based on these ideals. They were trying to build on something that they saw wasn't working, in England, across the Atlantic. And so they wanted something better. Of course, it wasn't anything that humanity would be satisfied with, thankfully, and that we have since tried to make it much better since then, and still have a long ways to go. But yeah, just narratives helps you see dimensions of reality that sometimes, you may have only thought about it one way. And when you unlock this ability to see the spiritual dimension in things, then you can see one another differently. You can see different possibilities. You can see, I love the name of your organization, Stories Change Power, because you can see the power that you might have had all this time, but never really fully appreciated because the stories that you were told or you told yourself made you think that power only existed over here or over there and not in a unified group of people striving towards common aims.
I really appreciate that, Matt. Yes, I think of the lenses, and we put them on like the 3D lenses, and suddenly things look very different to us. There's so many great questions. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see how many we're able to reach. But I see a natural segue here to one asking about if you observe differences in responses to the narratives that you're seeing, depending on whether the organizations were focused on religion and spirituality or other ideas and issues like environmental care, gender equity, and the like.
It was, I'll go ahead. It's a really interesting question. And I was thinking about it. I saw it pop up. And I think the thing that I would say in response is that this project actually really fulfilled our aspirations of creating a common conversation across those kinds of different areas of focus or concern. We did, I think, find that there was an appetite to go from a focus on environment or race or whatever it was, there was an appetite to go into like these deeper questions of our national stories, narratives, and also the deeper the commonalities that there are when you go to that spiritual, we start to try to take that lens of looking at the spiritual dimensions of the work. So I'm sure that there were different nuances that people brought based on those different kinds of perspectives. But what stood out to me, I think, was the appetite for finding the common conversation that kind of touches and connects to those different perspectives. I don't know what my colleagues might say.
Yeah, no, just to add that I think the diversity was so helpful when people came from different experiences because they really helped us all to appreciate this multitude of narratives, to unlock the different dimensions to it. There were passages, in this concept note on the website that we were, taking paragraphs from that would not have been there had not someone really brought those ideas and helped us to see how this was an additional dimension to the conversation. And so that was one thing that was really helpful in addition to what Selvi said was they added a fuller picture, but then also did so with the appreciation and understanding that we're trying to figure out how to tell a meta narrative that holds all of these together.
I haven't, we're not going to make it through all the questions, and that's a good thing. For anyone who we're not able to reach, we'll share more in LinkedIn, so stay tuned. But one I can't resist here is, can you give some examples of the metaphors that you're talking about and metaphors that came up along the way?
Yeah, and it's really nicely outlined in the document, the Narratives of America document, so you can go download and read it more in full. But um, we first say that metaphors, like narratives, are central to human understanding and meaning making. So they really help sort of frame things for us in a constructive way. And so some of the ones that we thought about was the metaphor of healing and growth. Sorry, let me say that again, healing and growth. We thought about developmental metaphors, like one of a seed only gradually maturing into a fruitful tree. And then there was this idea within that metaphor that the seed sacrifices its existence for the tree to come forth and then the fruit to bear itself. And so then it was this question of like, with the metaphor of the seed and the tree, like what do we need to sacrifice as a country to become something new, to become what we are meant to become? And so, are we attached to the form of the seed of this country, or do we see something that is unimaginable from the formation of the seed? And then the metaphor of birth was another one that, through a very painful process of coming forth, something, new life emerges. And then there was one other, this idea of the metaphor of building, and the question of the extent to which structures can be fixed if they originated according to partially faulty plans, or whether entirely new structures sometimes need to be built. So there's a few examples of the type of metaphors that we've sort of heard or seen in the discourse in the story of America that might be helpful to help us think about the life of the nation and where it's going.
Thank you for that. I am going to have, and Selvi, sorry, did you want to add more?
I just want to say that at least for me, I didn't know I wondered at the beginning whether there was a metaphor that would somehow capture what we want. And so far, I think what we're finding is that different metaphors capture different aspects of the truths. And so, like, a growth metaphor, gives you a sense of moving towards something, moving towards possibility. Unfolding something that's there, like the DNA find expression over time through the life of the organism, but it doesn't capture maybe in an adequate way a sense of pathology that I think we like. Not everything that's happened is just like a natural part of the life. It's things that need to be left behind, things that need to be healed, and so on. So somehow, like, those two metaphors together combined like give a better sense of what we're thinking about. And so I guess it's still an open question whether there is a metaphor that's the right one, or whether we'll just need to use different ones at different times for to shed light on different aspects of our narrative.
And that's a perfect segue. I'd like to do a lightning round into a final question. I'll pose this to the three of you as well as to everybody tuning in. And if you've got thoughts, we'd love to see those in the chat. But Rainn Wilson recently posed two beautiful questions on a podcast. And if we look back at our last 250 years and then look ahead at our next 250, here are the two questions. What is one thing that you hope America outgrows? And what is one thing that you hope it never loses? Again, one thing that you hope America outgrows, one thing you hope it never loses. PJ, I see you off mute. Can I put you on the spot first?
Sure, and apologies for not being on mute. I hope I didn't mess with your
No. Just looking at the little
Um,
icon.
yeah, no. I think I'll just kind of cheat and go back to what I was thinking about before, which is I hope that we never lose that spirit of enterprise and innovation that was mentioned in the quote, but that what we sort of, but that instead of just focusing it on the sort of material and technological aspects of it, that we really learn and lean into how to apply that spirit of innovation to the spiritual dimensions of change.
I can go next. PJ stole one of mine. I was trying to think of another one, but one of the things I hope we outgrow for sure, and this is kind of even related to my comment there, is this culture of contest that I think has long characterized how we do so much, how we do so much in the world, let alone this country, from our politics to, the way organizations are sometimes designed, just this culture in which we're always trying to one up each other or think that it's a zero-sum game. I do hope we leave that behind, and I hope we grow. Well, what I hope we never lose. I think I'll just reiterate again what PJ said, because it was the thing that stood out the most to me as well, which is just uh, this energetic enthusiasm, this sense of enterprise, this willingness to chart new frontiers and to learn new things. I think that can be brought to bear on the need to develop the spiritual principles that were a part of the founding ideals of this country, such as justice, freedom, and equality. So I think there's new ways for us to imagine how those can be applied for the betterment of all the world. And I think in America, we can do a great deal in helping to like push the frontiers of learning about that for the sake of the entire world.
I hope that we can never lose and live and more fully live into a sense of responsibility to the world as a whole, to humanity as a whole. I think we've seen the democratic experiment as something that is being carried out for the benefit of all of humanity. I think because of the way that we have been a country of immigrants, we have a sense of connection to other parts of the world that's very alive. We're a place that people come to and go home again from as well. Like there's a movement in and out of the country. So I think a sense of deeply a part of the world that has something to contribute to all of humanity, something I hope we don't ever lose and that we develop more fully. And something I hope we do lose is a tendency that has also always been there to want to capture that project for narrow interests. And we won't be able to fulfill that aspiration if that continues to be a part of our lives ongoingly.
And I think echoing much of what you three just said, thinking about the thing I hope we outgrow. And to be clear, I am a fan of responsibility and taking care of ourselves where we can. But I see our focus on independence as something that we could um, you know open up a bit. I think we've sometimes taken that too extreme. And I hope that we will grow into an appreciation of interdependence and how connected we all are. And I will say thank you to everyone who has joined today. The conversation in the chat, that ongoing conversation is so rich. And for everybody who had questions, we will loop back to you. For now, I want to honor your time. We'll put links in the chat to learn more about the wonderful, wonderful work that the U.S. Baha'i Office of Public Affairs has underway. We're also excited to share an opportunity to be part of this Narratives of America project. You can join on August 12th. Don't worry if all the links are going by too quickly. All of this will be in the follow-up message that we'll send to you with the recording. I hope that you'll join us for 4 Tuesdays this month for ethical storytelling. We're putting a discount code that works twice for people to save more than 50%. If you missed that, there's another one that we have to save just a bit. Join us in August. The next webinar in the series will be a fun one focusing on science, moving from Don't Look Up to really embracing that focus on science and communication. There's a poll that will pop up as you log off. Please take 15 seconds to respond. Your feedback is so helpful. Until next time, everyone, be well, do good, stay healthy and hopeful, and have a healthy and meaningful 4th of July. Thank you.